And at least so you can see a phylogenetic tree, you know what I'll do? I'll share screen here, and we'll discuss this a bit. We've also got Y chromosome right here. So here's what's amazing is they never want to address the bigger picture. The fact that whether you're looking at a Y chromosome family tree or a mitochondrial DNA family tree, the number of mutations, you're only looking at a few hundred generations max. The evolutionists cannot explain why there are such few mutations, such low variation, that all point to not just two common ancestors in the distant past, but two recent common ancestors. So if there is any questions, guys, I'll pull up the chat on my phone. Good to see everybody here. Doki doki, hey to you too. So here's the thing. We always point out that we like the uniparentally inherited DNA compartments, okay? Which would be, as you can see here, the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial DNA, okay? Where you can build some very telling family trees, very interesting family trees. And we know Eve, guys, if you have not yet read this paper, the Eve mitochondrial consensus sequence, we have her sequence. We know her. It's not difficult. And the number of pedigree studies that all confirm a young date. And remember, your critics like Dan, your critics like Evograd, Mays, Dr. Frello, okay? Regardless of, say, the error bars or the dates you may derive from the various numbers of pedigrees, it's nowhere near the date that they need. But they miss one thing. They miss a huge aspect of our model, which is the population bottlenecks, according to our model, which would lead for a time to incredibly fast substitution rates and mutation fixation, okay? Which actually perfectly explains the data that we get from the large number of pedigree studies where you can get dates from, say, 6,000 years up to 30,000 years. Okay, even your higher dates is exactly what we'd expect based on the model, based on those periods of time where we would have incredibly fast substitution rates, for example, where mutations are being fixated. Fixated just means to be stuck into place. Okay, and if you guys have not yet seen it, watch Brother Ramad's video demolishing Dr. Dan's points on Dr. Jensen and his predictions and his model. Watch that, which you can find on Sal's channel. Okay, so let's see. George Bond, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Doki made me do it. Montaz, good question, says, out of curiosity, when did you accept Christ, brother? Well, I grew up a Catholic, so but I did not accept the gospel. I didn't believe on Jesus Christ until both 6 years ago. 6 years ago now. So great question. So I've been at this for about 5 or 6 years. Lucas says, you can show in detail those unrooted trees. I really want to see the center of those. Modern Day Debate says, you live at 3 a.m. Yes. MDD, brother. We are party animals here. Okay, so let's see. Awesome. Jamie Russell, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yes, MDD, the party doesn't stop. We don't sleep around here. We drink coffee all day, every day. Because you know what? When you got evolutionists around, there ain't no time to sleep. Okay, so let's answer over a couple things with Luca and his question here, okay? So I want to point out that this tree here and the mitochondrial DNA tree, unrooted trees, okay? This one is on the Y chromosome. Dr. Carter points out an unrooted neighbor joining phylogenetic tree of the Y chromosomes, okay? Based on the Simon's Genome Diversity Project data. You can read this paper, must-read paper. I referenced it in Walker and I's debate on Modern Day Debate in detail. So this attempted to sample from a wide range of peoples. The result is a tree that is a good representation, guys. So this is a very solid representation of total worldwide Y chromosome diversity. Now, here's the thing. Okay, phylogenetic tree programs, they give you the opportunity to have a rooted tree or an unrooted tree. Now I'm going to keep going. Note the clear central starburst, right? So you see the starburst pattern, okay? Explosive growth from a starting point, just as our model would suggest. And the irregular branches that display more mutations than close kin. Now, here's why the unrooted tree is important, especially to avoid evolutionary assumptions and evolutionary bias, okay? In this unrooted tree, branches are allowed to spread out naturally, right? We want a natural pattern, guys. We don't need the evolutionary assumptions, because when we add in evolutionary assumptions, it actually destroys the evolutionary assumptions based on the human-chimp split and the molecular clock, which we can touch on a bit later. The evolutionary root would be located midway along the A1 branch. Forcing a root, okay, so this is what it would look like. Forcing a root at that point would produce the squared off stair-step tree, okay? So that is what's more familiar with evolutionists and what they're reading. Let me check the chat real quick. Okay, good, awesome. Hey, even at 4 a.m., we got a bunch of people. This is good. Okay, so let's see. Forcing a root at the evolutionary point would produce the squared off stair-step tree, perhaps more familiar to the majority of readers, with long spidery branches leading to a few rare African lineages. But this unrooted representation allows for a more natural reading of the data, okay, guys? It also doesn't change the fact, regardless of the data itself, as in the number of mutations that the evolutionists can't explain. Even when you consider genetic drift, substitution rates, and allow for a ton of purifying selection, the evolutionists still can't explain why there are so few mutations, okay, and so far away from the date where they want their evolutionary story to be when it comes to human origins and their out of Africa theory, okay? So we want the unrooted tree. We like this representation because it allows for a more natural reading of the data that can then lead to predictions, right? Dr. Jensen, we've covered it over and over again, the number of predictions that he's gone over. Let me know how sound is and everything, guys. Okay. So anyways, let's get back to what I was saying. You can read about this in the paper here in 2018 or on Patriarchal Drive, where they talk about this in great detail. And this is empirical evidence, guys. Okay. So I want to make this simple for everybody, just so when we're talking about these technical issues, technical topics that we're constantly debating, I want you guys to understand exactly what we're discussing. So why we like the uniparentally inherited DNA, right? This is a mitochondrial DNA tree. We were looking at the Y chromosome one earlier. For one, okay, this is a major reason why we love it. It's because the mitochondrial DNA, okay, it's passed down from mother to child, but it also lacks recombination. It's not as messy. It's not as messy as the nuclear genome. We can also agree with the evolutionists that, hey, the DNA differences we see in these uniparentally inherited DNA compartments, they're the result of mutations. We can do a head-to-head prediction with the evolutionist. The Y chromosome, same thing, guys. Passed down from father to son. And that's why, as you can see here, and we've touched on briefly, we can build some very interesting trees from the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome. And as you can see here, mitochondrial trees and Y chromosome trees grow in branching like patterns, right? We'll go back up to the Y chromosome tree. Okay. One day we'll really go into detail on what all this means and the different branches and the different points here. But for now, I just want you to take away from this the fact that these trees, whether we're looking at the Y chromosome, the mitochondrial DNA, they grow in branching like patterns, okay? And why this is, though, guys, it's due to mutations, okay? So for the audience, like I said, I want to make this as understandable as possible. What we can do then is we can literally reverse the clock back to the point where we would find Eve, or say our last Y chromosomal ancestor. And if we wanted to, okay, let's focus on mitochondrial DNA right now. If we wanted to, we could start with Eve, Eve being the mother of us all, okay, the mother of all living, as the Bible tells us. She would have children, and then her children would have children, okay? And every time a child is born, what may happen? Well, there is that chance that the child would have a mutation. Now, a mutation is essentially a copying error, okay? It's not going to help large-scale evolution. We're going to talk about that a little later with genetic entropy. But every time a mutation happens, what happens is we are going to get a new branch on the family tree, okay? And over time, the family tree gains more and more branches, right? Just as we see here, due to mutations, due to these copying errors. Now, what we can do is we can actually take this back. We can back this process up, guys. It's like a clock, okay, that ticks every single generation. We can back this up to the point where we eventually find the woman of whom we have all descended from, as the Bible tells us is Eve. But here's the thing, as we were discussing earlier, and I really want to emphasize this. There are only about 20 to 30 mutations. Guys, there's only about 20 to 30 mutations that separate most people in the world today from our Eve ancestor. The most you're going to find is about 100 in the most diverse people groups on the planet, okay? Not a lot at all. The evolutionists can't explain it. You should see the stories they got to come up with, okay? This is why they want to look to the phylogenetic rate. This is why they don't care about the pedigree rate. Wave it away. Dan was saying, you know, more or less, he doesn't have a problem with the Parsons paper, the Parsons rate, probably because Rahmat and I showed Parsons' response to the critics. Parsons said if he did it again today, he'd come up with the same data, the young date of 6,000 years. Okay, so that's important to consider. But guys, if the Bible account of human origins is true, and we have all descended from Eve just 6,000 years ago, it's so easy to account for all the mutations we see today. This is the bigger picture, guys. That's it. This is very easy to account for in the biblical model, the biblical time frame. As a matter of fact, the pattern, okay, you start from a center point. You see this starburst pattern. Our model says rapid population growth from a starting point. Okay, we have a starting point at creation, a starting point at the flood. We also have a starting point, in a sense, at the Tower of Babel. Okay, events where we're looking at incredibly fast substitution rates. So even when you see those ranges in your pedigree studies, okay, remember, mutation rates are still way, way too fast for the evolutionists, way faster than the phylogenetic rate. But here's the thing: when you consider all the studies, we don't disagree with all the studies. The critics, Dan was saying, you know, Rahmat and SFT, they disregard all the studies. We have a book out, Mutation Rates, okay, the truth about mutation rates, where we go through every single study and we point out the problems in some, we point out the pros in others, pros and cons of all the studies. But here's the thing: regardless of whether you're looking at a study that comes up with a 6,000 year date or a 30,000 year date, this is considered young. But we would never expect an exact date of, say, creation, okay? Because there's certain things in our models, like the bottleneck events, where, as I've said, you're going to have much faster rates of fixation, okay? There's still very few substitutions overall, all easily explainable by our model, accounting for everything that people like Dr. Dan want to say we don't account for, okay? Bottlenecks, genetic drift, substitution rates, purifying selection. No, this has all been accounted for. But here's the thing, the evolutionists are not going to tap out, guys, and they're also not going to give predictions of their own. So it's extremely easy to account for what we see. And this is why the critics have an incredibly, actually, in my opinion, an impossible time explaining why there are so few mutations separating anybody on this planet from the mitochondrial Eve consensus sequence and the Y chromosome Noah consensus sequence. Okay, let me check the chat since we're on screen share. George Bond, $5 super chat. Thank you so much, brother. I appreciate it. Hope that coffee's tasting good. He says, now here's the thing. The only facts of evolution are the missing facts. There's a lot of missing facts. You are right, brother. Doki Doki Bible Club. Thank you so much. That's the book right there. The True Story of Mutation Rates. Guys, we go through every single study. We've also had hours and hours and hours and hours of streams. I don't think anybody has gone through the studies in as much detail as we have. They've just all been ignored by the critics. That's not our problem. That's not our fault. Okay? And I'm not going to go through every single study again right now, as we have done, and make this stream another 10 hours. It's up to the critics to go watch those. God bless, Chad. Thanks for being here, even late at night. Awesome. Awesome. Great comments, great input. Now, here's the thing. CRISPR, Dan, these critics, they are right about, so for example, Dan, in his stream with Sal, his explanation for pedigrees, which we would say is the empirical rate, the empirical method, was correct. Using the empirical method, guys, we can compare mutation rates in the present. That's why we like it so much. And in pedigrees, all we're doing, okay, for anybody who's not familiar with what a pedigree may be, we're using parents to offspring, okay? And when comparing the mutation rates, I should say, between parents and children, it turns out, to the surprise of the evolutionists, that the mutation rate is much faster than the phylogenetic rate, which is based on a lot of assumptions, as we've touched on. And they don't like these fast mutation rates. It conflicts with their deep time evolutionary story. And that's why people like Dan would just say, I don't care about the pedigree rate. I more or less don't mind, or I don't have any problem with the Parsons rate, because they want to focus on the phylogenetic rate as compared to the pedigree rate. But as I've pointed out, it's hilarious, and I've said it over and over again, they got nothing yet, because even when we consider the substitution rate, even when we allow for a massive amount of purifying selection, which we've done, we still find far too few mutations for the evolutionists to explain. This is the bigger picture, guys. Okay? Now, here's the thing. What CRISPR was saying to Erica in their 3.5-hour rebuttal video, I don't have a problem with, because it's true. By definition, guys, the pedigree rate is obviously slower. Okay, nobody disagrees with this. The pedigree rate is obviously slower than the actual mutation rate, simply because a lot of these mutations will get weeded out over time. This is just basic. But these critics, what they do is they straw man and they misrepresent. Because the fact is, young Earth creation scientists like Jeanson, Sanford, Carter, they know this. They've accounted for it, which is why they are so willing to make testable predictions and accurate retrodictions, guys. So I hope that kind of breaks it down a little easier for you guys, to make it more simple, to see what we're looking at, what we're arguing about, why this is important, and why the evolutionary model fails, and also why these unrooted trees here gives us the patterns that we would expect. It allows for a more natural reading, okay? And when we add in the evolutionary assumptions, it doesn't work because of the breaking down of that molecular clock assumption. Baptist Chad, brother. Thank you for the support for my coffee addiction. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. All righty. Yes. Dr. Rob Stadler, please. Doki Doki is so right. Please go check out our interviews with him, especially the last one on his book. I did a series as well based on his book, Low Quality Science. Okay. And I got to point out that Gutsy Gibbon did a couple videos on just that, promoting the low quality science, like the fossil record, where we don't really have the genetics. We don't have the direct lines of evidence. The fossil record, which is low quality, low confidence science. A lot of assumptions. You can go to the fossil record and pretty much invent any story you want. That's why the genetic data, the direct lines of evidence, this is the best way to answer this question of ancestry, okay? And it's, as you can see, it's being answered beautifully well. Beautifully well. So as you can, I hope that helps with what this visual representation is, what it's based on, okay? What the lines indicate, the pattern, what a pedigree rate is versus, say, a phylogenetic rate, okay? Now this here, I've explained many times. Walker and I discussed it in our debate, okay? And you see all types of people groups in here. African specific groups, Europeans, Asians, for example. Okay. And I find it fascinating that what we see here, that starburst pattern, explosive growth from a center point. Okay. All this data did not have to come back to be true. And you know what? For the 1000th time, okay, which the critics don't seem to get. Let's look at this. HVR. You're going to notice how the branches all have different lengths. Notice this, okay, if you can see my mouse. What this means, guys, is the people in here all have a common ancestor, but yet one group in there, it turns out that they've picked up twice as many mutations as their cousin, okay? So here's the thing I want you guys to consider. If it is possible to pick up more mutations in the same amount of time, then we obviously can't look between, say, humans and chimps. The evolutionists say humans and chimps split from a common ancestor roughly 6 million years ago. Chimps are our closest cousin, according to the Pond Scum to People evolutionary fairy tale, okay? We can't look between them and then make an assumption about when they split. Okay? Because remember, this is just random mutations occurring in populations over periods of time. The bigger picture, which they want to ignore and is never addressed, guys, the bigger picture, okay? We see a pattern. The pattern goes back to what? A center point. And this is a beautiful natural reading of the data. Okay? We don't want to root it because of the assumptions. The molecular clock. We can't assume the split. We want a natural reading and we want to make predictions, which have been done. You've got your Ian Chen spamming the comment section saying Jensen's not making predictions when we've gone over a huge number. I literally addressed him live. Told him to come in. He didn't, which is fine. But I must have went for 15 minutes explaining the history of civilization, the predictions being made in regards to genetic stamps in the Y chromosome, mitochondrial DNA. Maybe it went over his head. I don't know. But he spams the comment sections with the same arguments that have been answered. And it's funny. We love them. We love them. But that's the bigger picture, guys. Mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome. Let's go back to the Y chromosome family tree. They mutate fast, faster than evolutionists ever expected or predicted. Creationists are making predictions. Evolutionists aren't. Dan attempted. I give him credit. He attempted, and Matt and I decimated that claim in a 2-hour video addressing that prediction in great detail. Okay, we see one woman, one male, exactly as what the Bible says and has predicted. Mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome DNA. Very little variation worldwide. Humans have low genetic diversity, exactly as what was predicted and expected based on the Bible. They can't explain this. other than with rescue device after rescue device after rescue device. Post hoc, ad hoc population bottlenecks with the out of Africa population bottleneck. No predictions. Guys, look at this. It's clearly a reflection, okay, based on everything we've talked about mutations and the branches, okay, the branching like patterns, how fast the rates are. Okay, this is the Y chromosome phylogeny. Go back to the mitochondrial DNA one. This is clearly only a reflection of thousands of years, okay, and not the deep time, let's say hundreds of thousands of years, as the apologists of human evolution want to say. There's not a lot of mutations on both the Y chromosome family tree and the mitochondrial DNA tree. And guess what? When we don't use evolutionary-based assumptions, there's only one obvious conclusion to this data. The tree's young. Okay, we've descended from a single female ancestor and overall a single Y chromosomal ancestor. Both nothing like the chimpanzee. Okay, so I want to make that clear. All right. A shot of coffee would be good, this boy. So any objections or anything, let me know. Let me know in the chat. Montaz, I appreciate it, brother. I want to make it good fruit, my man. If there's any questions or if there's ever any if there's any advice or any opinions on how to make the streams better, let me know. Baptist Chad. Yeah, I don't think she'll debate genetic entropy because it's pretty much the critics want to wave it away, and they've even admitted it. That's why we've got a Jungle Jargon. Good to see you. So yeah, objections, questions, let me know. Let me know. It's pretty. I mean, it's pretty clear cut. You know, there's no way around it. Doki, thanks for the wink. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. So, you know, this is just fascinating because all of this did not have to be true, and yet it is true. So anybody who just got here, check our article section. I'm gonna have a drink of water here. We just released a couple new articles on Neanderthals. Doki Doki Bible Club. You know what? I really want to show you. So Dr. Carter, I've got the video pulled up. We haven't shown this one in a while, but he did a really good job explaining what I just said, but also showing the fact that this was not expected under their model. Not even close. Okay, because they want to invoke, as we know, coalescence, and they want to say that this is exactly what we would have predicted, exactly what, you know, the evolutionary model or story would have expected, which is very far from the truth, guys. So I'm going to play this clip right now, just a short one, and then we're going to get into endogenous retroviruses. Doki Doki, thank you so much. I appreciate it. 8:30 p.m. in Sydney. Perfect time for Ian Ask Questions Live. Yes, Ian. Yeah, Ian. Live questions would be a lot better than the comments in the comment sections after the fact. Thank you so much for the super stickers, super chats. You guys are awesome. Lots to look forward to for the new year, I promise you. So let's share screen here. I'm going to mute myself, guys, so there's no echo. And give me 1 second here. We'll be good to go.
Creation model, which makes no sense. No, in creation, God can front load the genome with as much diversity as he wants to. If all variation is caused by mutation, absolutely, it's impossible. You can't get all the variation we see in modern people if we start from Adam and Eve if they're 100% homozygous. Right. But what if God front loaded Adam and Eve with like 20 million variants? then we can lose half of them and still have as much as we have today. And 20 million is not a lot. I carry 3 or 4 million. You carry 3 or 4 million of the common ones, and probably 3 or 4 million rare ones. That's fine. So it's actually trivial to start with Adam and Eve and get the people we have today as far as the number of variants. Especially if you had 6,000 years of mutation, you can have a lot of new variants appearing in that 6,000 years.
Right. They're coming from their perspective of the evolution having to work in a short time period.
Yeah.
Well, so what are some of the best evidences for a literal Eve and a literal Adam?
Well, the best evidences are the fact that we found Y chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve. Now, the evolutionists put them in a different place where I would put them, but it's quite clear there's only one human Y chromosome. And all men share a very similar Y chromosome. That didn't have to be true, because if we came from a common ancestral population with chimpanzees, that ancestral population would have had a diversity of Y chromosomes. And when the population split into the lineages that led to humans and chimps, it's possible that we could have, like, in this ancestral population, type A, B, C, and D. Well, if humans have type A and B, and chimpanzees had type B and C, that means there would be a human and chimp who both had type B. They're more closely related to each other than a human is to another human on the Y chromosome. But it didn't work out that way. It's, mathematically and theoretically possible, but it's totally not true. There's only one Y chromosome. In fact, just yesterday, or maybe the day before, they redid the Neanderthal Y chromosome, which is really weird to me, because for a long time, we only had female ancient DNA. All the Neanderthals, all the Denisovans, as they're sequencing, they're all female. Like, why is no males? We got like 20 females and no males. Something really weird. But they finally published a partial Neanderthal Y chromosome several years ago, and it was way different. I mean, way out in left field. Like, oh wow, I think it's really different. Well, just a couple days ago, they replaced it with a very modern human one.
Wow.
And the Y chromosome common ancestor between Neanderthals and humans, modern humans, is much more recent than it was last week. They totally redated it.
Incredible. Wow. Where can we find that study? I want that one. But so how about molecular clocks then? Do they support a literal Adam and Eve? And is there a constant clock? Is there an average clock that can actually be made?
Yes and no.
Okay.
If you take a constant average for things we can measure in the laboratory today, you can get an approximation of how long ago Y chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve lived. It's only a few thousand years. You don't need tens or even hundreds of thousands of years. Now, they don't like doing that, so they're like, the Y chromosome right now, the clock is grounded in the time when Native Americans got to North America. In fact, the Y chromosome guys, they call that a sanity check that appears in several papers. So they're not using genetics, they're using archaeology to give them a clock so they can figure out how far long ago mitochondrial Adam was, Y chromosome Adam was.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. But if you look at the measurable mutation rate from one generation to the next, it's a lot faster than they want it to be. But I don't like the molecular clock idea. I don't think it works. If you look at a Y chromosome family tree and you look at people that are closer related, maybe in the same group, well, some of those people could have twice as many mutations as their cousin or relative that came from the same founder of that group.
Mm.
So like group R1b, I'm an R1b, 80% of Western Europeans are R1b. If you look at the R1b founder and then you measure the branch lengths of all the individuals that are R1b, there are people twice as many mutations as, wait a minute, that means there's no clock. That means you can't put your finger on the tree and know how long it took for these many mutations to accumulate. And yet, if you just do a rough approximation, everything is young. There's another issue. I wrote an article called Patriarchal Drive. I published it in the Journal of Creation. Did some computer modeling. I said, we kind of know that the older a father is, the more mutations he passes on to his children. And I said, but if Noah was over 500 years old when he had Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and that population was reduced to 6 people, that means those 3 sons, their father was over 500 years old when they were born. That means they each got a huge dose of mutations. And as that post-flood population starts growing, these really old men are going to continue to have children. And the older they get, the more mutations their children are going to have. I call it a patriarchal drive. And what it does is it totally messes up the average. It takes, some kids are being born in this population with 800 mutations, and some kids are being born to a young father and they only have 10 mutations. So you can't look at the branch length on the tree and know that the branch length equals time. It does settle down after a while when now, men today aren't having children when we're 500-600 years old. We tend to have children when we're 30 years old. That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So there are problems with molecular clock, archaeologically, genetically, philosophically, mathematically. Yeah, we can still use it if we want to.
Okay.
So, question from, thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate it. Stevie, good question, brother. Will SFT respond to IP's video against Young Earth Creation? Definitely. So we're going to get together, do a full response. We could refute it in our sleep. IP never addresses the scientific data, the predictions coming from Young Earth Creationists, and his hermeneutics are horrible. So we're going to address that. We did have a massive comment that we put together. Matt put it together, addressing each point. It was on his original video, but then he removed it and re-uploaded it. I think he found a mistake. And we've also debunked some of his points on like to subdue and have dominion and in previous videos. So yeah, we're going to do a full video on it for sure. And I'm excited to do so. So Nicholas says, Nicholas, probably same thing, brother. Nicholas probably watches that video and he can just refute it point by point. So, you know, IP, I don't know who he thinks he's making these videos for, but any informed young earth creationist will just tear it apart, tear it apart. And here's the thing, inspiring philosophy, he's only parroting arguments from John Walton, Michael Heiser. And all those arguments have been destroyed in detail in highly technical articles, right? And that's who he's getting those arguments from. So they've already been destroyed. So it's going to be an easy video to debunk, and we're excited to do so. Now, the video we just showed with Dr. Carter going over a few important things when it comes to molecular clocks and Y chromosome, mitochondrial DNA, patriarchal drive, it hasn't been addressed by the critics. It hasn't been debunked. Patriarchal drive is very interesting because, as Dr. Carter was explaining, we know Noah was extremely old, and therefore he would have passed on an incredible amount of mutations to who? Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And they're the ones, them and their wives, they went on to reproduce the world. Okay? And after the flood, you would have had these small populations. And for a time, okay, until longevity really decreased to pretty much where we see it today, these biblical patriarchs, they would have been having kids in their old ages, and their kids would have been having kids. And there would have been a huge amount of mutations per generation. So definitely check out the article we just put out that I wrote on Neanderthals, because I spent a great deal of time on patriarchal drive, and I think you guys will find it really interesting, and it's a lot of fun. So anyways, I wanted to now go into